Hello and welcome to another Spotify Green Room. What is this? Wagon Wheel podcast. I'm Jarrod Kimber. It's a slightly different time today, so we might get different people, we might get different questions, we might get different things. Because obviously I'm sleeping throughout the entire day because I'm in the UK trying to cover the Ashes. So we're squeezing them in wherever we can. But thanks to everyone for joining in. As usual, line up your questions when you feel like you have questions. If you can only listen to a little bit of this podcast on Spotify Green Room, remember that it is also available, eventually be on the YouTube channel, but it'll also be on the Red Inca podcast on Saturday. Big shout out to our sponsors. I've got the Bodyline t-shirts on. I've got a big WG Grace. I don't know if people know this, but I actually used to live like about 180 meters from his grave, where he was buried in South London. And my local pub used to be called the Graces, although it had jam donuts and Black Elvis nights. So it's not exactly as WG Grace left it. I think that's probably fair to say. But also a huge shout out to manscaped.com. If you want to buy the ultimate gift for the man in your life this year, try manscaped.com. The Lawnmower 4.0 will make his testicles feel very smooth. And don't you want every man in your life to have incredibly smooth testicles? I know I do. You can use the code REDINCA, that's all one word, REDINCA, when you're buying it, and you get 20% discount of free worldwide shipping. So go buy it for you, buy it for men, buy it for everyone. But big thanks to Manscaped. And let's have a look. We've also got the Patreons, of course. We've got absolute bunch of Patreon questions this week. If you want to get your questions in first on this podcast, the best way to do it really is just to go to Patreon and become a member. I can't remember what tier it is. It's one of the tiers. There's a few tiers. There's always tiers. And you can then, every week I put out a message and you can ask a question. Of course, you can always come on live and try luck, but it doesn't always work as well, especially if we get busier on some of these. Our first question this week is from Gopinath, who says, about New Zealand. How did the Kiwis get 4 or so high-quality wicketkeeper batters in their test team in the last decade? It's hard for others to get 1, let alone 2. Okay, so this one is, in some ways, it's fairly simple. What New Zealand have actually managed to do is not get 4 high-quality keeper batters. What they've actually managed to do is just have more quality batters. If you have a lot of batters, you are going to have a lot more wicketkeepers. Because essentially what happens now is, in the old days, at under 13, under 15, under 17 level, school level, all these sorts of things, you would pick your fast bowlers, your spinners, your batters, your all-rounders, and your wicketkeeper. Now you pick all the other things, and from that list, you essentially make one of them wicketkeep, which means that there are so many kids out there who are not pure wicket keepers, but they're learning it, and then that happens at the professional level. So it's funny that you talk, Gopinath, about New Zealand. In this England side, see if I've got them all. We could have a test this year, although with Rory Burns' ball the other day, perhaps not. But we could have a test in this Ashes where England have Rory Burns, Ollie Pope, Johnny Bairstow, and Joss Butler. They would have 4 wicket keepers in their 11. And we've seen, obviously, many teams Sri Lanka's the king of this, aren't they? So I think in a lot of cricket cultures around the world, they're not really backing wicket-keeping skills anymore. What they're really doing is just getting batters. So what the real question you're asking there is that they just have a lot of people who can bat. And then some of them have been, sticky taped gloves on them. Doesn't mean that some of them haven't become really good keepers as well. That can happen. Matt Pryor is probably a very good case of someone like that. Becoming good, and we've seen that again and again. But realistically, it's about the batting. It's really interesting talking to how wicket keepers become wicket keepers these days, and it's almost always the first time they're at a representative or a decent level of cricket. Literally, the question is, does anyone want to keep? We didn't pick a keeper, and then someone puts their hand up. And then the next, the next tournament, they don't do it, and someone else does it. Sometimes it's not like the old days where you pick the best wicket keeper and hope they could bat. Ripu says, is it a genuine concern for Australian cricket that how few fast bowlers have debuted in the last few years? Now with Pattinson retiring, Siddle up there in age, their fast bowling reserves look grim. Does this play a part in their apprehension to implement rest and rotate? Well, Nathan Coulter-Nile probably in another era becomes a very good test bowler, but I think he's probably not quite good enough to split his time between T20 and test cricket. And because he's sort of gone with T20, which makes sense, he's made a lot of money off it. He's probably not the level of test bowler that they want. Billy Stanlake is probably a disappointment. He is obviously a test level bowler. On skills, there ain't many people like him ever in the history of cricket, but he just hasn't come along the way that they would have wanted. They dissuaded a lot of very good fast medium bowlers, or even medium fast, or even medium in Trent Copeland's case. Trent Copeland, Chad Sayers, Chris Tremaine. I'm probably missing Nisa. So they didn't want any of those. They've had a lot of highly skilled guys that they could have brought in, but they wanted fast, medium, or even fast bowlers as much as possible. Jai Richardson's probably had slightly more injuries than they would have been happy with. The reason that they don't rest and rotate is because I think outside that four that you mentioned, if we include Pattinson in it, everyone else is probably a bit of a drop-off anyway, and they don't want the drop-off, right? Even the fact that they went back to Siddle is really interesting. Rather than going with Copeland or Sayers or I think Tremaine was probably out of form by then, or Michael Nisa, sort of tells you how they feel about some of those other guys. If they're going to go with a sort of medium fast medium type of skillful bowler, they wanted one that had played for them before. So again, they're limiting who they want. They've flirted with Jackson Bird at times, and I think he's been okay at times, but there are certain test pitches where he doesn't look like he's ever going to take a wicket. But yeah, I hope that one answers that. Rajashi says, since you always answer my question here and never on the YouTube video, well, that's because this is where I do question and answer, Rajashi. He goes one. Is there any psychological, biological limit to the fastest bowling speed humanly possible? No, I wouldn't have thought so. Psychological, I don't know how that would even work. Biological, I'm assuming there is, but I don't think anyone's done a test on it. We probably thought 100 miles an hour was the limit. We've already had people break that. So no, I wouldn't say that is a limit. I think that just happened to be a round number that people thought we'd never bowl at. We've seen in baseball, baseball pitches getting quicker as a group, not just at the high end. In cricket, we haven't seen as much on the high end, but certainly as a group, we've seen bowlers getting quicker and quicker. We're seeing the women get quicker as well. We're learning more. I assume it will just keep going in small increments. It might eventually be like a bit of a plateau, and maybe there is a peak, but I'm not sure what that would be. Jimmet says, not a question, just praise. Congratulations on being part of history by calling it Ajaz Patel's 10th wicket. That was very, very, that was fun. I didn't expect to be calling that. It's one of those things. I try and live in the moment so that I'm watching it with the viewer or the listener when I'm commentating, because otherwise I get too far ahead and there's too many thoughts in my head and it comes a bit too structured. So I don't think I really realised that I was about to call Ajaz Patel's 10th wicket until his 9th wicket had gone. So it was an incredible moment and a lot of fun to be able to do that, certainly. Ian says, as above, you commented on a great piece of history and did it brilliantly. Well, I mean, at least one of those things is true. Got me thinking, though, if you could go back to any other match and call an iconic moment, what would it be? That's really interesting. I think for me, it's probably more... maybe some of the... I'd love to have called, Ireland beating Pakistan. I think that is maybe one of the most seminal moments in cricket history. In the 2007 World Cup, in some ways it sort of changed the way that we thought about the associates in a way that even Bangladesh and Kenya, having some success in World Cups previous, hadn't. Ireland was such an outlier and wasn't considered part of the cricket conversation. Actually, one of the best, if I could do one over, it would be the Dutch beating the England at Lord's in the short broad over, which is still one of the most breathtakingly weird moments I've ever witnessed. I was there as a fan, actually. Absolutely bizarre. Ray says, continue with the bowling theme. Ambidextrous bowlers, are there any? And if not, how come? There aren't many. There are a few. There's one in Sri Lanka. Is there one in Australia? Maybe one in South Africa. There's a few hovering around the first class level. The reason we don't have more, it's the same reason they don't have more in baseball. It's like, what are the odds that you're good enough to be a professional pitcher in one with one arm, let alone with two. Like, it's very, very unlikely. There aren't, as far as I'm aware, there aren't many tennis players who serve right-handed and then go, do you know what, I'll try left-handed as well today. The skills that you need to be able to do it at the top level. The reason that cricket might have an advantage is that if you are ambidextrous, and I mean genuinely ambidextrous, we can both spin. So at least you don't have to pitch at 85 miles an hour or bowl left arm quick at that rate. And we've had players before, guys like Alan Border, Colin Miller, someone else I'm missing as well, maybe a South African, who probably could have done it. I mean, Jofra Archer can bowl left arm finger spin, and I've seen him bowl left arm wrist spin. Whether it's test quality or ODI quality, I don't know, but there's a chance one day he might rip out one of those for fun. So there are players with the ambidextrous skill, but there's a difference between having ambidextrous skill and preparing it. So there's a few baseballers that have done it, and they've really worked quite hard at what's the best way of putting it? They've worked quite hard on working on both arms, and even they are generally not effective at the professional level. They quite often have success in minor baseball, and even some of them who play college ball have success, but it's very, very hard. The one advantage, though, is, as I said, the spinners, but still the dexterity that you need, the quality that you need to be an international level or a franchise level T20 bowler in both hands is, chances are you're only going to be able to do one or the other. The Sri Lankan guy whose name I've forgotten, that's not going to come back to me. He bowls left arm finger spin when he's bowling to right-handers, and he bowls off spin when he's bowling to left-handers. I remember Gareth Batty was commentating with me at TalkSport when we were out in Sri Lanka when he was playing, and he said you could see the marked difference between the two skills. So in one skill he's like a full-timer, and the other skill he's like a part-timer. I think that's more often than not going to be the case. So that's probably why we haven't seen more of them, Ray. But thanks for the question. Sandeep says, isn't it ludicrous that KS Barrett's spectacular show behind the stumps when he claimed 3 dismissals will not be part of his official test record because he was a substitute? It was an official test, the dismissals were legitimate, and everything else will be official record. When you say official record, like, what do you mean? Who's keeping official stats? Is there an official record of stats? There are stats. Some people might include those and most people won't. The Association of Cricket Scorers, oh my God, I should know that one. Cricket statisticians, they won't claim that those are stats, but you can. The ICC don't actually keep official stats as far as I'm aware. I could be wrong. I've certainly never seen a database that says official stats. So if you want to claim them, you're allowed to. Other people's won't. I just don't care that much, if I'm being honest, Sandeep, but that's fair enough. Ramnath says, is it a valid assessment to say that there is a selection bias towards cricketers from New South Wales when picking players for the Australian team? I remember Brad Hodge alleging that he wasn't given enough chances as he came from Victoria, and a similar view was expressed by David Hooks. Is this a perception of bias backed by data, or is this a stereotype? I have to have a look, but my memory is that New South Wales have won close to a third of Sheffield Shields. I mean, there's a reason why their players get picked more often. I think what happens, though, in any selection area is once you consistently pick from one area, you trust those players more. I don't think it's as much of a problem for Victoria. I think it's a massive problem, probably historically for Queensland, maybe less so for Queensland now, but certainly historically for Queensland. Still a big problem in Tasmania, South Australia, and Western Australia. Again, less so now, but historically, they were so far away from everyone else that people didn't see it. We didn't have access to video and everything there. It also probably comes back to an amateur thing. If you're running an amateur selection committee, you're probably going to go back to the well over and over again. You would hope that in professional times they'll cast the net a little bit wider. There's always been a thought that Victoria, because you mentioned Brad Hodge, that Victoria tries to have the best Sheffield Shield side it can, and New South Wales tries to prepare test players, especially over the last 20 years. And I think that is something that is probably slightly based in truth. Quite often, Victoria probably has a stronger team or is trying to put a stronger team out, even if New South Wales actually still has better cricketers. And New South Wales like, oh, well, we won't pick this guy because he won't average 50 in Test cricket. So we'll move on. I think New South Wales is even slightly changing that. But I think there's a lot of different reasons. But also, Sydney is where, or New South Wales in general, but Sydney in general is where so many cricketers have come from. There's actually more cricketers in Victoria, but they haven't ever produced the same level of quality for whatever reason that is. Maybe, the club scene doesn't quite work as well, or, whatever that is. It could be something as simple as Victoria has this other form of cricket called as district cricket, and then there's another form called sub-district. It could just be that maybe some the player pool is a little bit more spread out compared to, grade cricket in Sydney, which is, up there with, Mumbai and, the northern leagues in the UK and, some of the leagues in Chennai as just the strongest in the world, Barbados. So it could just be those sorts of things. I don't know. But yeah, I think at times there's been that bias. There's probably been that bias in the other direction as well, because quite often the selectors were literally representatives of the states, which is a terrible way of doing it, because unless you have 6 people on the selection committee to begin with. Christopher Hart says, on comms on day one, I heard Mike Hussey talk about data, and that's a great thing for bowlers, but as a batter, he'd prefer not to look at it in too much detail. I'm imagining from a cricket point of view, regardless, that's not really sensible, but I can understand how mentally it may be easier for him. As an analyst, do you find this to be common? Oh, look, I think, don't forget, Mike Hussey came from an era where he didn't have that much. Almost all the best data that we have in cricket has been specifically helping bowlers so far. I think we don't have as much information for batters going forward. I know England tried quite a lot with the batters around the 13-14 period, and there was some good information given, and there's certainly stuff that you can give batters, but at the moment we haven't worked out enough. But yeah, I just think that he's an older player, and probably, he was quite successful the way he was anyway. I wouldn't read too much into that. I think Mike Hussey's quite. I know he used to use it at Sydney Thunder, so he's into data. But yeah, before you go out to bat, I'm not sure it's particularly a great thing. Just on this, Kyle's just sent a message through on the chat saying, I think only one ambidextrous pitcher has made it to the MLB, and he had a mediocre short career. Yeah, I think there's been a couple, Kyle. There's certainly been a few drafted, but yeah, very few have made it to the major leagues, and they haven't been that effective for the reasons I said before. Rhubarb says, having just seen Ben Stokes somersault on the boundary and noticing what seems to be players looking to find more elegant, safer ways to fall, are players essentially given some kind of acrobatic training in fielding? When did the focus on that skill start to develop? It was probably when Australia and South Africa really took diving to another level in the 90s. There's still, I would think that probably judo, and as you say, maybe some sort of acrobatics should probably come into it. There's still a lot of players who do not know how to dive and don't know how to dive in different positions. So I think that's probably fair that we need to probably move forward a little bit from that. But we're maybe in the second generation of players, all players diving, well, most players diving. And so perhaps that's why. That could be the reason. I'm not sure. Sorry, everyone. That came from nowhere. Big thanks to all the people on Patreon. Remember, if you want to get a question in early, you can always become a Patreon supporter and then do it that way. Let's get into the live questions. Ashish. Poor Ashish. He's been waiting to ask a question for an hour, and then you press the button, and it doesn't work. Rahul.
Hey, Jarrod. I wanted to ask something about yesterday's Ben Stokes no-ball saga.
Mhm.
His every ball was a no-ball before he balled the no ball that got David Warner out. So essentially, they said that the technology that checks the no ball wasn't working. That's what I read somewhere. So in that case, shouldn't they have just put the onus to the on-field umpire to call it? Because what I'm wondering is that if they would have called a no ball before that, Ben Stokes would have corrected his foot that was landing, and subsequently the next ball would have been an actual, they would have taken the wicket of David Warner. So I wanted to know, what are your thoughts in that scenario? Like, it's a pretty, they could have made a score on the technology.
Sorry, you're feeding out there, but essentially, what they did is they went back to the period where no ball calls didn't work. And the reason that I didn't call them on the field is because essentially of the Adam Voges incident. And the Adam Voges incident is where he was bowled. The umpire called a no ball. And then it turned out that the ball was not a no ball. That's why they don't call them on the field anymore, because there's not much they can do here. A bowler has legally bowled a delivery, but because there was a no ball call made on the field, there's a chance, although very slim, that Adam Voges heard that, and then that's why he played the shot that he did. So in order to handle that, I mean, what you saw yesterday was basically what me and Adam Collins have been moaning about for years until they brought in this new system, which was that there were hundreds and hundreds of no balls every day uncalled in Test cricket. I think the record that I saw was, oh God, what's his name? The left arm wrist spinner from Sri Lanka bowled 21 no balls in a 24 ball period, and they weren't called. It's got absolutely ridiculous how bad it was. And what you saw yesterday was going back towards that thing. But the reason they don't want to call them on the field is because they don't want to accidentally call a no ball that is not a no ball, because that actually causes them even more problems. But everything you said is right. Everything that you said I've written about, and there's a podcast with me and Adam Collins before they made the official change to call the no balls off the field about how ridiculous it was. Essentially, we created a sport where we weren't even officiating one of our major laws. Absolutely ridiculous. But some of that comes to do with the fact that cricket had evolved as well. It's very hard now for an international umpire to look down and look up when all the bowlers are 85 miles an hour plus quicker. And then there's the fact that, a decision where you make a mistake by a millimeter or two looks much worse in super slow motion. But yeah, the real mistake yesterday wasn't going back to that system. The real mistake yesterday was not telling anyone that was happening. Like, why did they try and hide it? Did they think they'd get away with it? Like, you made a mistake. That's fine. The technology doesn't work. We all understand COVID. Let's move on. And that wasn't the case. Thanks for your question though, mate.
I had one quick follow-up on that. So essentially, do you know what technology is this that is actually measuring the foot on this? I honestly thought that why can't just third umpire always have a screen in front of him that also checks the no ball?
It is a screen, but it's got to be fast action, and it's a special camera, so it has to be instantaneous. Because if it's not instantaneous, by the time it happens, it takes too long. So it's a technology that has to happen instantly, especially if you think about with spinners. So that was the big problem. That's always been the big problem with that system, is if it doesn't happen straight away, you don't get to see it. So that's why that's where the technology went down. It's not that they can't have cameras on the thing, but they didn't have the full system that they needed. I don't know specifically what went wrong. I don't know if Adam Collins or Jeff Lemon wrote about it, but they were tweeting about it yesterday.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jarrod.
No worries. Cheers. All right, Jimmy boys coming through.
Hi, Jarrod.
How you doing? What's your question? Oh, you there, mate?
So, yeah. So, I wanted to ask about World Test Championships. That why are we not having a best of three final?
Because there's no time in cricket, and we can't. I mean, we just play England, India, World Cup, IPL, New Zealand, India in the space of 10 minutes. That's why we're not playing a best of three World Test Championship.
And what are the changes do you want to see in the World Test Championships in the future?
I want it to be a real competition and not just bilateral series that we call a World Test Championship. That's the most important one. I want it to be sold as a league rather than be sold as bilateral series that will help everyone out. Those are the basic ones. It's just the bilateral series that we call a World Test Championship at the moment. It's not actually a World Test Championship.
Would it be better off having a two-tier system with two divisions like we have in Premier League?
Well, we do have two divisions. We have 9 teams in Division 1 and 3 teams in Division 2, which kind of tells you how ridiculous it is. But we do have two tiers. They floated the idea.
It looks a better system for Test cricket, especially because there's no point.
Of course, there's
no point having a. Like we saw the recent Pakistan and Bangladesh series. Bangladesh had no match in their home conditions for Pakistan. Pretty well said, isn't it?
Yeah, but
I think two-division system is a better system than the current World Test Championship.
Of course, it's a better system. Everything's a better system than what we have, Jimmy. Look, they floated the idea of having 17 Division 1, 17 Division 2. The teams didn't want it because Sri Lanka, West Indies, Bangladesh were terrified of going into Division 2. Well, if you're terrified of going into Division 2, why don't you actually make sure that your teams are better? Why don't you invest in improving your cricket culture? And that's not what they're trying to do. And so instead, we've got this terrible system that doesn't really work. You don't deserve to play Division 1 top level Test cricket because you were given membership in 1878 or 1880 or 1929 or whatever year you got it. That's nonsense. It is a stupid system, right? Everyone should be allowed to play Test cricket. Uganda should be allowed to play a Test match against Nepal tomorrow, right? And the reason that we haven't allowed that, we let it be run as a gentleman's club, and because of that, we have this stupid system that we now are left with. You don't get to go to the Olympics every year because you had a good sprinter in 1912, right? You have to continually keep having people qualify or meet certain markers to be able to go to the Olympics. And you certainly don't get to the final of the Olympics just because you were good 100 years ago. So many things you have to qualify for. And Test cricket, we set up a gentleman's club where you don't have to qualify for anything. This is what we're living with. It's a stupid system that no one would create now. And when the teams were offered a better system, they all shit themselves because that might make them less relevant. And instead of making the competition better, they chose themselves. Welcome to cricket, Jimmy.
And how about the scrapping of the Super League overnight? I mean, Netherlands have played just one series till now. And I think
Look, I kind of think that at a certain point something had to cancel. The fact that it was a Super League is ridiculous, as you say. The fact that the women's qualifiers, but at a certain point, I don't think they could keep playing.
Yeah, women's qualifiers were cancelled as well. So that's a big deal.
I mean, they're both mistakes, obviously, but honestly, I wish more cricket was being cancelled than less. Trying to fit all this cricket in to coronavirus with everything that's going on is just batshit crazy.
I mean, that system wasn't right, to be honest, from the beginning. Having 10 teams and this Super League, that's ridiculous. I mean, you're not allowing associates to play in the World Cup, and you're calling it a World Cup.
Yeah, the whole thing is ridiculous. The way that cricket is run is ridiculous, which is a fairly normal, fairly normal part of cricket. Thanks for your question, though, mate.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, Ashish is back, hopefully. Oh, Ashish, you might have to write your question out manually, my man. Oh God, who? Perbaday Gosh. I might be pronouncing that right. Is it Perbaday? I think you got your mute on, Perbaday.
Hey, Jarrod, can you hear me?
I can. What's your question?
Hey, so first of all, I would like to request you to make a video sometime of Joe Byrne.
I would like to request that no one makes requests. What, do I look like a wedding DJ?
Sorry, but I just think he's a fascinating player, and like every time he comes back, he scores a big 100, but then he gets left out for some reason.
Because he's not that good. I mean, he's not. He's a flawed player who has the ability at home occasionally to make some very good runs for Australia. But he's a flawed player. His record probably flatters him a little bit. So with the request, when people ask it, I know this sounds weird, but I'm not actually, the videos, it's not like, they basically come to me. I know that sounds like an odd way, but when you say make a video on Joe Burns, yesterday I wasn't making a video on Marnus Labuschagne, right? Like yesterday I was making a video on, today actually I made that video. I wasn't making a video on Marnus Labuschagne. It's really like a trend that I noticed with him that was a bit weird. That's what the video's about. So it's very rare for me to go into a series and go, I'm going to make a video about Jasprit Bumrah. It's just like suddenly Jasprit Bumrah does something specific, or I noticed that, I haven't done anything on Ashwin and left-handers, and then I want to dive deep into that, or, whatever it is. So the videos sort of they don't come from a player's name, I suppose is the best way to do it. They come from like a quirk or or a story point or an arc or something like that, rather than the player themselves. And that's why when people make requests, they don't really work, because that's not how my brain works. I don't listen to my own requests.
That makes sense.
No worries. Did you have any other questions, or was that it?
Yeah, my question was, it's about umpiring, and so in recent India-New Zealand series, the umpiring came under a lot of flack. And the one question I had was, looking at it, whenever a decision review system or a DRS challenge is called, I see that the control completely switches over to the third umpire, as opposed to like in football, where in VAR, there is a monitor that the actual on-field referee looks at, and then takes a decision. So do you think something like that could help improve umpiring decisions in cricket?
I think that would make it worse. Firstly, umpires would have to run 80 meters to get off the ground to that unit. So you would slow the game
They have a
down.
handheld device, right?
No, they couldn't. Do you really? Have you seen some of the footage? Let's. What about that? Was it the stumping? Was it Ross Taylor in that Test match? Do you really want someone looking at a mobile phone to decide on whether that was out or not? Like, the footage isn't good enough to begin with because the cameras are so far away. Putting it on a mobile phone is no good. No, what I want is professional third umpires. Stop making people who don't understand technology try and do third umpires a third of the time. It is a specialist position. You need to know, you need to understand how the TV companies work. You should be in a place with high-end computing power. There should be a lot more support around you. It should be completely independent. And by independent, I mean the people who are running it as well. There's no point having independent umpires and then we have, local techs in. It doesn't make any sense. It should be a completely independent thing, and it should be run out of UAE. And we should have specialist third umpires who actually know what they're doing. Perfect example was Virender Sharma in the last Test didn't even know what the processes were because he doesn't do it enough. So no, that's what it should be. That's how I would fix it, which is what basketball does, which is what baseball does. I'm trying to think if there's another sport that does that as well. But yeah, you basically have a bunker somewhere, and those people have all the equipment that they need to be able to do this. And third umpires is a specialist position. For former umpires, like, you still want probably professional umpires to do it, but I think there'd be a lot of professional umpires around the world that'd be like, wait, I can live in Dubai rather than having to travel. I mean, Gunnar Gould told me once that I think he said 270 days of the year he's away from home. That's another reason we struggle to keep umpires. All right, they spend so long traveling, so many of their hours. So, no, that's what I would do. But great question. Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, let me check if Ashish, did he write his question? No. Ashish, look, I can try you again, but I just think that let's see if this works. Hey, maybe we got you. Ashish, you there? Oh, we're so close. Talk to me, Ashish. Oh, hello. Oh, it's just not happening, is it? It doesn't like him. All right. William, you there?
Hi, Jarrod. How are you doing?
No, yeah, not too bad.
So, like, you can tell I'm English, and I'm already slightly tilting at the shocking efforts from England so far, which is already making me start to feel the Ashes is only going in that, typical direction of bad. The thing that's getting me is that I think England have just been poor and Australia have been good so far, but I'm getting a lot of sympathy from my Australian friends saying things like England have been really unlucky and, Wood bowled really well and, XYZ small things going wrong. And I'm just not used to it, basically. So, like, you're Australian, like, are we just shit, or like is some kind of middle ground where Australia have bowled well, batted well so far, and we didn't bat well and have bowled okay and fielded appallingly and looked really cooked?
Yeah, I think if you look at the if you look at the data of how much the players were in control, so David Warner's innings, after 100 balls, I looked it up, and he was in control about 78% of the time. That's comically low for someone who's faced 100 balls. Generally, if you're only in control 78% of the time, you're probably out more often. Yeah. And when you looked at, I can't remember what it was, I think someone looked it up, the first 30 or 40 overs, right? When you looked at the first 30 or 40 overs, there wasn't that much difference between the amounts of plays and misses and times that England batters are out of control than there was compared to the Australian batters who are out of control. That suggests that luck plays a part. Also, there is I think Australia probably had less plays and misses, perhaps because they were a little bit more, because maybe the Australians left better when they were batting as well. I think that might have played a part. Or England at times were maybe a little bit too short or a bit too wide, so a lot of the plays and misses weren't as dangerous perhaps as the other ones. But other than Chris Woakes' early spell, I thought that all the seamers bowled really, really well until they all started to get injured or sore. And then obviously it did fall apart a little bit. But put it this way, there was a very good chance that Even if you give Warner his runs, there's a very good chance that Australia was going to get bowled out for about 250 there before England sort of lost control. And Travis Head obviously played his innings. There's selection issues there too. That probably doesn't happen. The score, as it stands, probably doesn't happen if Broad plays ahead of Leach. That is. I think that was always an error. I would never have picked Jack Leach to play in
Leach now
Australia.
impeccable, do you think, going forward?
Well, you can't. I mean, he doesn't bowl very well against left-handers, and there's a lot of left-handers in this team. I don't know what they expect him to be able to do. Like he's never bowled well against left-handers. He's not a traditional spinner that would be good in Australia. So bowlers who are good in Australia usually either can bowl with overspin naturally or can do it when they need to. Someone like Ashwin. Jack Leach doesn't bowl overspin. He's not tall. He's not that kind of bowler. It's not his skill set. And also, he's usually only good when the ball is ragging sideways. I mean, you're setting him up to fail massively by suddenly dropping him into an Ashes test when he hasn't been playing on flat pitches for England, right? Like, I mean, they've been using him
playing
almost
at all,
exclusively.
actually, this year.
Well, playing at all, exactly. So I don't really understand why they did what they did. But yeah, I think anyone watching that performance yesterday, when you look at Ollie Robinson and Stokes, even, I think, did Wokes leave the field at one stage? Wood fell over a bunch of times, and Warner's luck. It would be hard to say that like Australia blitzed, but that narrative only lasts for one innings, right? So if England come out and get bowled out for 150 again, no one's going to be saying England's unlucky in this Test match. Whereas if England...
That's quite inevitable because we did look a bit shell-shocked.
It is. Look, I still think there's a little bit... when the ball's new, the first 40 overs, I still think it's quite difficult to bat on. I think Australia proved that. I think maybe Marnus Labuschagne's probably the only top-order player the only player who faced the newish ball who looked comfortable in this entire Test so far. So I think that's probably
Having read your
fair.
piece today, that's just because he's unbelievably good, isn't it?
It could just be that he's better than everyone else. I find that hard to disagree with. But thanks so much for your question, William.
Oh, thanks a lot.
All right. Ekanth, are you there?
Yeah, hi, Jet.
Just project.
The question might be half. So it's about the interplay in psychology.
Mhm.
Bowlers right now have better pitches, particularly faster. They have increased accuracy, set up batters. And batters kind of, at least at the top level, judge, select shots. And, the situations are often dictate how they go about it. We talk about going after runs and playing for serve.
Mhm.
Even on this, like, how do you is space bowling pandemic? When you're going to approach that corridor of uncertainty. At any point, score.
Well, that's the interesting thing is that the corridor of uncertainty doesn't really work anymore because what happened was batters were just leaving everything. And so now bowlers bowl warrior on the wicket and the corridor is not really there. They're really trying to get as close to as off stump as possible now, or at the very least make the batters feel like every ball is going to come back and hit off stump. So that's already changed. And so batters, we don't know if this happened first or second, but batters moved to batting on off stump because of that. So we've already seen that change that you're talking about. And so what batters are trying to do is they're saying, well, if you're going to bowl at off stump and middle stump more often, or around very close to off stump and middle stump more often, I'm going to pretend that that's on my pads and I'm going to whip that ball away. So that's what is already happening. And then you're seeing the opposite of that is Pujara, Sibley, Brathwaite type players who are just like, okay, well, you're going to bowl a lot of good balls. My only way of beating you then is going to be to nullify that good ball for as long as possible. So we'll see a few players like that. We'll see a few other players who will take the ball on, which is sort of, almost like a risk and reward type situation. And then there'll be other players who this new style might actually help a bit more naturally. They probably prefer the ball to be closer to their stumps rather than outside off stump. And so they'll be handling it. But yeah, that's essentially what has already happened. Well, I mean, driving on the ups are always a risk. It's more of a risk with the wobble ball. If you're driving on the up for an outswinger, you at least have the idea that, okay, well, this ball is starting to go and I'm driving it on the up. If you're driving on the up from a wobble ball, you've already committed to your shot before you know which way the ball's going. Good luck.
Smith's dismissal. Smith, I don't
Yeah.
how much of an last but one. So how do you think bowlers are dress?
Not unnecessarily. It does change the angle. So if you're set up for a delivery and they go wider, it does help. I think that generally in the old days, there was always like one or two bowlers that did it. And, you know, usually the smarter bowlers would play with the crease a little bit more. I think what you're finding maybe in the last 2 to 3 years, maybe even 3 to 4 years, that so many bowlers are using it as a tactic now. So if you look at the way that Tin Southee set up the Indian batters, he basically would bowl 3 balls from close to the stumps and then 1 ball from wide over and over again. It was a really simple pattern. You know, we were talking about it on TalkSport, and he did it again and again and again, and so often it worked. It does change your angle, and it should change your angle as a batter. And generally 2 things happen. One, that it literally, you're playing a different kind of bowler when they go wide on the crease. And the other thing is that it makes you play at balls that you wouldn't normally play at. And we've certainly, like, you know, Just Callis used to do it. We've seen a lot of players try it. You know, I was, as a leg spinner, it was something that I did a lot, you know, just to change the angle. You know, so 3 balls landing on off stump from closer to stumps, and then 1 ball landing on off stump from wide. So I could basically bowl 4 straight leg spinners, and but set batters up in a completely different way. So yeah, I think it works, and it's always worked. I think the difference now is probably it's people are training to do it rather than just doing it in the game on a whim. And I think we'll only see more of it. I think it's a brilliant tactic. Thanks for your questions. Keshuv. Keshuv, you there?
Yeah, hi Jarrod.
Hi, what's your question?
Hi, so just want to know your view on this, you know, Virat being stripped off the ODI captaincy today, yesterday, because I just feel it's being blown out of proportions a little bit, because I recently heard Virat saying in a press conference that, you know, before when there was Ravi Shastri and now there is Rahul Dravid, the common idea behind everyone is to take Indian cricket forward. That's the motive for everyone. So if that's his thought process, then I'm sure that, you know, being taken away from the ODI captaincy wouldn't have really made a lot of difference for him. So
I don't think that's the issue. I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue here is, why was he taken away from the ODI captaincy? Is it for cricketing reasons or for other reasons? And then did they show respect to their captain in the way that they released this? And the answer on both of those is there's no real reason for him to be stripped of the ODI captaincy based on their record. They're a phenomenal one-day team. And the way that they treated him was unprofessional. You know, I'm not going to go into the whole, oh, he's Virat Kohli, you should respect him. I don't care about that because that's for other people. But it's unprofessional what they just did.
But do you think it makes sense to have a different ODI captain and a different T20 captain? The last time I can think is Stuart Broad and Alistair Cook in 2012. After that, it hasn't happened.
Oh, I think it's fine to have it. I don't have any problem with that. I mean, you could easily have multiple captains there. I don't see any reason why. I mean, they're 2 different formats. So yeah, no, I've got no problem with that at all.
And another thing was here, like, you know, Virat has had like this captaincy for so long. He had a ODI World Cup and a T20 World Cup and didn't really get the results. But now with another T20 and ODI World Cup on the loom, with Rohit already being T20 captain, I thought it made sense to give him the ODI World Cup as well.
Even if you're right, it doesn't matter because that's not what's happened here. Quite clearly, there's political nonsense going on, and the way that they released it is obvious that there is a bigger issue here. When you say they didn't do anything, they made the final of the Champions League, they made the semi-final of the World Cup, right? A lot of this is just, you know, if they had a bit of luck in either of those tournaments, they probably should have made the final of the World Cup. They probably should have made both of those finals. They had a chance of winning the World Cup. Champions Trophy, they were in the final. Things go differently in that game. They win the game, right? I mean, sometimes I feel like people don't actually understand what's going on here. This is a phenomenally talented one-day team, and he's certainly a big part of it being a successful winning team. Now, if they decided what you said, oh, he's not going to be around with the next World Cup, or we want to change for the next Champions Trophy, those are all valid things to do. But the way they've handled it is still unprofessional. And I don't believe they were sitting around going, I don't think they did due diligence on this. And so if that's the case, then they deserve to be mocked in the press and online and all the different things that happen. I think that's very, very fair. Thanks for your question. Ashish is here. Look, the spirit of Ashish. It's like Faf du Plessis on a green seamer in South Africa, just taking the balls to the chest. Ashish Thomas, what have you got for me? You're on mute to start with, so that is not a good way to begin this. Can he unmute himself? Does he have the power? Oh, he's asked the question another way. Beautiful. As my audio is not working, yes, we have gathered that. With certain unconfirmed rumours that after the 2022 mega auction, there may not be any more auctions. Can we reimagine the IPL in a system similar to NBA, NHL, American sports, where there's free agency, a draft, etc., and when a new team comes in, they get players in the expansion draft, like how the Seattle Kraken did in the NHL. Great name, the Seattle Kraken, too, isn't it? Yes. I mean, I don't know about the mega auction. I've heard rumours on both sides. I haven't really talked to anyone specifically about it. But I personally think the auction is done. Here's what I believe. There was that whole thing about KL Rahul this year, and it's like, oh, maybe he talked to another team and all this sort of stuff. KL Rahul is one of the best players who has ever played in the IPL. He's a seasoned veteran. He has captained his team. He has played for India, right? KL Rahul gets to pick which team he wants to go to now. He shouldn't be in a situation where that's not the case. What auctions or drafts should be for is for players who don't have that experience, or players who I've got no problem with having an auction or a draft where you have players who already have experience, but maybe they have less than 30 IPL games, right? Those guys, probably less so picking where that they play. But once you have more than 30 games, or you have more than 20 games and an Indian cap, or you're an international player with 20 games and you've represented your national team 10 times, you should be able to be picked as a free agent. I think that's what a mature league does. It respects their players. At the moment, the auction is just. I mean, you can basically, unless you could force a trade, so Shikhar Dhawan might be one of the few players who kind of managed to do that. Unless you can force a trade, and realistically, these teams don't really know how to trade yet because there aren't that many of them. Also, trading in the IPL or any T20 league is fraught with danger because there's 8 teams and you're going to have to go up against the person you traded against. It's not like being in the Western Conference or the Atlantic Division and trading someone to the opposition in a different division to you. So there are all those things that are definitely part of it. But yes, it should be a more grown-up league, and I certainly believe that we should be getting to the point of having proper free agency, expanding the trades. And as you say, when you have a new team come in, they should have the earlier draft picks. Also, like at the moment, look at the end of Sunrise's year. There was nothing there. They weren't even tanking. It's just like teams are just sort of hanging at the bottom at the moment. I'd prefer a team like when they know they're not going to make the finals, trying out all their young players, and then knowing that they're going to get a good draft pick the next year. Like there's something to build towards. And the other thing is, look at Delhi. Delhi did all this stuff to build themselves up as a team with an incredible young core, and then couldn't keep it. That's what you want teams to do. You want teams to take chances on young Indian players and develop them, and young overseas players and develop them. Realistically, you want someone to go, you want someone to pick Rodman Power and just be like, okay, we might not be able to use him for the first year and a half, but let's just get him in, let him play spin for a while. And eventually, if we can get him to play spin and strike at 130 against spin, and maybe we can teach him an extra couple of slower balls, then his batting at the death will be so useful to us that we'll be able to use him for the next 7 or 8 years. That's what we want. That's a proper sporting league. And that's not really, at the moment, we have this sort of endless churn. So yeah, I think that's certainly something that we need to look at going forward. Thank you very much to everyone for coming in. Thanks to manscaped.com. Remember, if you use the code REDINKA, all one word, you get a 20% discount, free worldwide shipping. And also, clean balls or shaven balls, smooth balls, maybe is the best way of putting that. And this is a sport where we look after balls. Well, hopefully anyway. Big shout out to also Bodyline T-shirts and everyone who supports us on Patreon. Also, if Patreon doesn't work for you, there's also the Buy Me a Coffee option as well. But thanks to everyone for coming on. Obviously now in the next little while, because of the Ashes, my timings will all be out. So these will be at all sporadic times. But huge shout out to everyone who turned up on the Spotify Green Room today. And thanks for your questions. And I'll talk to you again next time.